Hey everybody, Jamie here from Flow Genome Project with a long delayed return back to our Freaky Friday series of freestyle Facebook Lives. So thanks for joining us. Go ahead and turn on your sound. Turn on your sound to listen to the conversation and look forward to seeing and responding to your comments as we go. But what we were looking at today was I just finished writing and submitting an article that's based on our new book, Stealing Fire, and it's should show up in Time magazine, fingers crossed, in the next couple of days, because our publicist said, "Hey, look, 50 Shades of Grey or whatever the next movie is coming out this weekend. You guys mentioned that in your book. Why don't you do a bit of a riff on that?" So I'm just kind of fresh off, about 6 hours of a deep dive into that essay, and just wanted to kind of share with you guys one of the points, because one of the obvious paradoxes of 50 Shades of Grey, of course, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 5 years, you are aware of that book and its endless sequels. And one of the funniest things about it is how god-awfully bad it is, and yet how wildly popular it was. And in fact, Salman Rushdie, the famous English writer, said it makes Twilight look like War and Peace. He said, "I have never read anything so bad that has been published." And yet, get this, 50 Shades of Grey sold more copies than all 7 volumes of Harry Potter combined. Right? So, what is going on there? How on earth can we experience that kind of wild discrepancy between the quality of a piece of art, in this case literature and film, and its success? And then, as is kind of promised in the title, and what does that have in common with EDM or electronic dance music? So the first thing I would propose is just to say that in both these instances, electronic music and, in this particular instance, really badly written kinky sex smut, that what you're looking at is not the art itself. You're actually looking at the state change or the state of consciousness that it either promises or precipitates. And so in the instance of how did so many mainstream women in particular find themselves resonating with what would have been really a fringe activity or range of sexual practices, well, what 50 Shades of Grey did was it basically took, and this is also technologically supported, right? If people were having to read, glossy magazines or the book itself, before it became so mainstream it almost became acceptable, in those first couple of years, 2011, 2012, 13, it was Kindles and ebooks, right? Sales of that book went through the roof because I could anonymously read it on my iPad or my Kindle. No one knew overtly what I was reading. I remember standing in line at a Chipotle one day and just casually glancing down at the table that was beside me, and there was a woman in the middle of her lunch break, deep into the hot and heavy, thinking she was being completely anonymous, right? So what, in that one move, the launch of this book and its coincidence with ebooks and rather sort of more anonymous reading abilities, basically edgy sex, what used to be the sort of, sleazy Times Square, put your nickel in the peep show kind of thing, trench coats and brown paper wrapped, smut, went suburban. It became minivans and Kindles. And what happened there is that you had an enormous number of people getting exposed to and even getting sort of, rudimentary information on how to hack or shift states of consciousness via more adventuresome sexuality. And so just to kind of share with you guys some of exactly what that sexuality is. So Anjan Chatterjee, who's a neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote in his book, The Aesthetic Brain, he talks about the French terms. Of course, the French always have terms for everything, especially all things sexual. And one of their sort of more famous ones is la petite mort, the little death. And the idea is that at the moment of a particularly intense or long-standing or long-duration orgasm, that there is this moment of sort of knocking out your consciousness. And the idea that that can produce a transcendent state, free from, this is what Chatterjee says, free from fear, free from self-consciousness or awareness, and free from concern of the future. And so you think, oh wow, that la petite mort, that little death, of which what we would make the case more broadly in the book, all ecstatic practices, those things that take us out of ourselves, that motion, that transition from inside myself, waking, inner critic, self-aware, to outside myself, feels like dying. And specifically the French have just labeled the sexual access to that experience as la petite mort, that's highly desirable for a lot of folks. And in fact, there was a Dutch study in 2013 that went so far as unpacking that and realized, hey, that practitioners of BDSM, sort of kinky sex, sort of whips and chains and pain and teasing and all that kind of stuff, that experiencing that flush of neurochemistry, and we'll get to that in a minute, actually left them on a battery of psychological metrics. So not just one in the moment, but over time, more psychologically well-adjusted, better able to handle adversity, right? Better integrated on about half a dozen psychological maturity and well-being metrics. So there's this strange paradox that by doing something sort of curiously fringy, or something that used to be the domain of a sort of, sometimes damaged goods subculture, and I totally welcome the comments to challenge that on the contrary, but by and large, right, folks who are willing to roll the dice on their social or personal reputations, quite often had already been pushed or marginalized. So you think of the sort of the Castro district in San Francisco in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? I mean, folks who had already said, I'm already a freak and a misfit, I'm just going to fly my freak flag, versus, I'm suburban country club, mom or dad, and I've got a reputation to uphold. So the idea there is that these experiences, what we do by hacking our neurochemistry in these states, is actually profoundly beneficial for us. And the interesting thing is that it's not just sexuality, right? It's any of these experiences, whether it's meditation and mystical states, whether it's smart tech and zapping our brains or entraining our heart rates, whether it's immersive media like VR or AR, whether it's flow states through artistic or athletic or creative efforts, whether it's psychedelic states or other pharmacologically induced states, they're all different doors opening into this shared experience of what, again, Chatterjee would say is that transcendent state without self-consciousness, without thought of time, right, and without fear. And that those accumulated over time can actually increase our psychological well-being and integration. So let's just kind of finish up, what's happening with kinky sex that is so interesting neurologically, and and how can that help us understand this crazy discrepancy between the quality of 50 Shades of Grey and its impact. So, just to kind of just run down the list off the top of my head, I mean, the first thing is that, pleasure, and particularly erotic pleasure, but any kind of pleasure, can produce endorphins. And for that rings a bell for most folks. Those are our endogenous opioids. They're about 100 times more potent than morphine. They feel awesome. They used to be ascribed to runner's high. That's been kind of revised much more lately, but endorphins make you feel great. Well, pleasure feels really good. That's where the endorphins come from. But pain can actually increase the release of endorphins even more. That's why it basically lets animals deal when things suck, right? So the idea of tattoos, and people say it's not the tattoo, it's the getting of the tattoo, that's endorphins that they're referring to, right? The idea of how people can do superhuman things when they're injured, that's endorphins. The idea that most animals, if you ever watch, do it like they do on the Discovery Channel, if you ever watch a video of animals mating, it's very rarely tender and gentle, right? It's usually nasty, brutish, and short. And you're like, how the hell do they keep doing that? Well, endorphins to override pain is one of those things. So one of the first things about kinky sex is cross-wiring or hot-wiring the pleasure-pain circuits, so that close to arousal, in particular in women, their women's pain tolerance doubles. Close to orgasm. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the stats on what men do, but the idea is that you get close to that place and you can cross the wires, and pain actually gets looped through, triggering endorphin release, and feels pleasure. Take another one, teasing, right? So the idea of uncertainty. Are you going to get a smack across the ass, or are you going to get a feather tickling you, or whatever the hell people want to do, right? The idea that straight up stimulus response, meaning, I do this thing, it feels good or bad. Let's say that gets me 100% of dopamine, pleasure, right? But Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, which we've shared this before, but has often called it, he's got such a great phrase for it, he calls it the magic of maybe. And when he's done studies with rats in particular, and I would imagine, common sense suggests this also correlates to humans, which is that when a rat presses the lever and gets a shot of dopamine or a shot of cocaine, whatever the stimulus is, to prompt dopamine in their brains, they get 100% shot. But if sometimes they press that lever and they get nothing, dopamine, woohoo! Next time they get 400%. So the idea that teasing can actually quadruple the amount of pleasure if it's based around uncertainty is profound. That might also explain why your husband or dad or grandpa is so maniacally obsessed with golf or fly fishing, right? Why would sports that are just designed to frustrate you, why on earth do people keep doing them? It's because when they do finally land that rainbow trout, or when they do finally get one below par on their local golf course, like the reward is off the charts, and they'll willingly suffer for it again and again and again because that magic of maybe, that 4x return, is apparently worth it. Right, so think of another one. Let's think of which other ones are in the mix. Oh, nipple stimulation. My goodness, everybody knows this. This is true. This is one of the sort of keys of old Mother Nature, ensuring that mothers bond to their children. But nipple stimulation, whether it's a suckling infant or any other, sort of adult to adult play, massively stimulates release of oxytocin. And so that increases pair bonding, increases trust, increases intimacy. And so you've got, you can tweak and play with endorphins, oxytocin, dopamine, right? All of these things. And furthermore, you can also, even stimulating the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is literally called vagus, is from the Latin, which means wandering, and it goes from our brain through our heart all the way out to our root. So it literally kind of wanders all through our bodily system. And stimulation of it, whether it's through the throat, so the gag reflex, will stimulate the vagus nerve, as will pressure in the colon. So Dr. Anish Sheth out of Princeton he kind of playfully calls it poo-phoria, which is the strange feeling that sometimes people can get, in the bathroom, having a massive duke, and they suddenly sort of feel goosebumps, or they'll even feel a drop in blood pressure. They might even experience exhilaration or euphoria. Well, what that is actually the stimulation of the vagus nerve. So I'll leave it to your guys' imaginations to think, well, what might stimulate, right, throat and colon, but certainly any of those activities would also be, basically you're jacking into one of the more profound parasympathetic regulatory systems in our bodies and create an experience of euphoria. And again, Sheth says, to some it may feel like euphoria, to others like an orgasm, to a lucky few like both, right? So you realize, oh, wow, so that is fascinating. So let's go back to the Kindles and the minivans and kind of edgy sex going suburban. So when we realize what is going on with 50 Shades and how is it that it has such an outsized significance. And again, I just kind of looked up for writing this article. I was like, so what were the reviews on the movie? Were the movies any better than the books? No. Rotten Tomatoes, 25%. 25% rotten, sucky ass movie. And here comes it. But it grossed over $500 million worldwide. Right, so not plot, not character development, no redemption from from the screenplay, from the novel, just shitty all the way around, and yet $500 million worth of box office. And you can make a case, I think I'm about to, which is that it is not the art that is driving and motivating people for that. What is driving and motivating people, particularly women, and we can kind of do a whole gender-based socio-political analysis, access to knowledge, permission, blah blah blah, but fundamentally permission to consider. Right, a range of experiences of surrender, of abandon, of transcendence, right, that mainstream norms and values and just access to information would never have allowed prior. So to compare it, right, if you take a look at at EDM, right, electronic dance music. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, predominantly EDM is, it's a dude with a laptop. And there's been some recent scandals in the last 3-4 years. It was like highly paid, like guys who are making 8 figures a year, meaning $10 million plus, and sometimes $500,000 to $1 million a show to show up to play an hour or two. And some of them have been stone cold busted just for like hitting play on a laptop on basically playing their iPod. There's some interesting fades and there's a little bit of production, but more or less showing up there and hitting play on a pre-recorded set. So you're like, okay, so this is none of the kind of, this is not seeing the Rolling Stones live and seeing the dynamic between Mick and Keith. This is not watching the Beatles and going, oh my God, you know, there's Paul and Ringo, my favorite. This is not singing along with your favorite anthem, you know, and your favorite lyrics. This is none of that, right? All of that shit is just off the table in EDM. And what you've got is a dude in a hoodie with a laptop. And so the question becomes, as with 50 Shades, what the hell's going on? Because if you take a look at, what are they, Ticketmaster and all the varying, Live Nation and all the varying, you know, booking and ticketing agencies, EDM music today is responsible for 48%, and that was the stat that ended up in our book Stealing Fire. I would assume it's actually higher. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's crested the 50% mark by this point, but you know, so let's just say more than half of all live ticket revenue, box office, these days is going to EDM music. And it's not even live. It's not even live. So your question is like, okay, so all the normal things that would prompt me to go to a show and rah, 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 and pay a lot for a ticket isn't there, right? No band, no lyrics, you know, none of that. So what's going on? Well, what's going on, similar to 50 Shades and its kind of user manual for erotic ecstasis, EDM is fundamentally an immersive experience of musical ecstasis. And what you have, and Durha, you just shared it. Thank you. That's great to see you guys. Melania, great to see you as well. Woohoo, right back at you. And the question is like, what's going on? Well, what's going on? There's a kind of, you know, Madonna sort of famously, you know, cheesed it up a year or two ago, which, you know, gets on stage like, has anybody seen Molly? You know, and her desperate attempt to remain relevant to millennials, but you know, she was speaking into the worst kept secret of electronica, which is that there's a shit pile of psychedelics and pharmaceuticals going on at these events, and that in conjunction with really crazy, mind-blowing light sound installations, etc., and exceptionally high-fidelity sound systems, and you've basically got transformation chambers that are entraining people's bodies and brains. So you get, you know, the beats, right? Solid beats, and of course EDM is famous for 140 BPM, beats per minute, right? So very high, frequent, driving, thumping bass, right? Which over time shifts everybody's brain states. Everybody therefore is moving to a beat, and they're moving with each other. So you get mirror neuronal bonding, meaning I'm connecting to the people all around me. We drop into a state of communitas, Victor Turner at University of Chicago's term for kind of a group flow experience. I've primed my body and brain, and most of them, I mean, think about this. I think that MDMA is solely responsible for the huge amount of utterly shitty EDM music out there because everybody's on an amphetamine. So of course I want to move my body. It doesn't matter whether you're laying down some funky beats or not, right? That does not move me. Straight beat EDM is some of the most mind-numbingly dull shit out there, and yet you see crowds of 250,000 people throwing down like it's the funkiest shit you've ever seen. So you're like, what is going on here, people? Well, what's going on is they got an excess of amphetamines in their system. So quick sidebar to that, right, is that, and what are they doing, right? So MDMA is a relatively unique amphetamine in the sense that it prompts norepinephrine, which is the stimulant I'm up and atom, dopamine reward chemical, but then also prompts a flood of serotonin. So the serotonin is the warm, ooey gooey, peace, love, unity, respect stuff, but that tapers and washes out. And then for the people that sort of want to keep chasing that party train and they pop more as they go, the serotonin in your brain is gone, so you're not getting any more from the MDMA. All you're doing at that point is you're hooking down more amphetamine. So you're getting more norepinephrine and more dopamine. And that's the grindy, I gotta suck on a lollipop and I wake up in the morning and my cheeks are raw. So for public service announcement, let your friends know, like, that train left the station. If you want more of the ooey gooey, you gotta go back and replenish your serotonin levels. But all of this is to say, so kinky sex is doing it with pleasure, pain, stimulation of different bodies, different nervous systems and circuitry, right? And they're creating a saturated state, what the infamous bad boy of Western sex magic, Aleister Crowley, used to famously call erotocomatose lucidity, which is just a really fancy way of saying fucking your brains out. right? Can you persist in erotic stimulation long enough that you overwhelm and fatigue and shut down waking everyday consciousness? And can you create a sort of a eroto, right, sexual, comatose, sort of not fully awake lucidity, but on the other side of that, not down, I'm here. And that was the place that they used to play a lot of, work their juju. So that's that is the yearning, right? That degree of transcendent surrender is the yearning that good old Anastasia Steele is and every suburban housewife watching her gets all weak in the knees for. And then you've got the same thing happening with all the ravers. So the ravers are like, okay, I'm going to pre-prime my body-mind with helpful pharmaceuticals. And again, I mean, there's no mistake why MDMA is sort of the substance of choice in that crowd. Because what do I want? I want something that bonds me and connects me to others. It leaves me feeling safe, secure, and a sense of well-being. So that's all of the serotonin and the oxytocin. But I also want to dance my ass off until sunrise. And that's where a little of the juice of the amphetamine side of things comes in really handy. So Tomorrowland, for those of you that are familiar with EDM, Tomorrowland is one of the world's largest EDM festivals. It takes place in the Netherlands. Tickets just went on sale this week. And I think they sold out. This is for 2 weekends back to back. They sold out in, I think, 55 minutes flat. And this is probably for 500,000 people. So you're like, oh shit, there is a marketplace for this. Right. And Jack, you just so great to see you. Where can I find more of your stuff? Our organization's Flow Genome Project, and you can just find that. I think you should be finding it like Facebook-wise on where we're broadcasting right now. But flowgenomeproject.com is the website. There's like a free test where you can take Flow Profile, which is our research project, but it'll tell you how you get into flow states or in the zone. Go for that, and really, like, these Freaky Fridays are a fun way for us to let off steam and actually color outside the lines a bit, and also preparation for our book, Stealing Fire, which is from which this conversation that we're talking about right now, specifically the sort of emergence of kinky sex and the popularization of it, the neurochemistry and functionality of EDM and music. We've got a section on Function 1 sound systems, Boom Festival in Europe, Burning Man, all those kind of things, and basically saying, hey, these tools, these techniques, regardless of the entry point, right, are all open source these days. And they're all completely accessible. And that, unlike any other time in history, is a radically new thing and potentially powerful. And Melania was just saying, Tomorrowland in Atlanta was a life-changing experience both times I was able to go. It's like brain coupling with people from around the world. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, our friend Andrew Jones, who some of you may know by his pen name or artist name, Android Jones, who is one of the world's leading visionary digital artists. We actually have a whole section on him in the book as well, in the sense of technology. Like, look what's happening. We're going from like art in canvases or painted on caves to art projected against the Vatican or the UN, or immersive interactive 3D, and that's the kind of stuff that Andrew's doing these days. In fact, he just got back from Necker Island, sharing and showing some of this stuff to Branson. So you're like, okay, so now we combine crazy ass beats, Function 1 or other incredibly high fidelity sound systems, right, which cease to be just listening to music, right? Alan, you keep posting Sadhguru, and at first I thought it was some commentary towards me, and then I think it's just your dude. So in any case, like, hang on to your guy, but we're good on the promos. And so the idea that incredibly high fidelity sound stacks, right, do something different than just me listening to undifferentiated sound frequencies through a radio or a home speaker system is pretty pronounced. And the Grateful Dead actually were the originators of that. They actually, Owsley Stanley, who was their trust fund acid head provider way back in the late 60s and early 70s, basically, he was the guy. Owsley Acid was kind of infamous. He sold it all and just rolled, because he was a trust funder, he didn't give a shit. He wasn't a drug dealer. He was just like, let's just get it out. Let's take the proceeds and let's put it into the baddest ass sound system you'd ever hear. And if you guys look back at Woodstock or Monterey Pop Festival and you hear Hendrix and all those things, one of the classics of like late 60s, early 70s music was just wild ass distortion. right? Because they'd turn it up to 11, they'd crank the hell out of it, they'd overload the speakers, right? And it would just be this fuzzy, blurry mix. And that was like cutting edge for rock and roll. And for anybody that's familiar with Jerry Garcia's guitar playing, that was the exact opposite of what the Dead did. Despite all their noodling and, wonky shit sometimes, what Owsley Stanley did is he invested in what they called the wall of sound. And they built a sound system that was so high-end that they could blast people's brains only on 1/10 of the volume. So it was incredibly high fidelity, zero distortion. And that was the technical backdrop to Jerry Garcia's sort of silver moonlight, quicksilver guitar runs that happened to coincide very, very nicely with high-dose LSD. So that was their jam. Fast forward all the way to today in Tomorrowland or Boom Festival or Burning Man, and what you've got is Function One sound systems, which again, what's his bucket? His name is Jones. His last name is Jones, and I'm spacing on his first name, but the founder of Function One has been around since. I mean, he was in Glastonbury, he was all those components, and Function One sound systems have such a high separation that if you stand in front of a stack of those at a show with a high resolution files, and clearly not MP3s, that kind of thing, but like the kind of stuff producers and DJs will play from, you get a separation of sound that is so pronounced. It's like standing in front of a sonic car wash. It's like an acoustic water pick for your soul. I mean, you feel like the trebles and the bass and the mid-range, and they come squint. You can literally like locate them in space as they come towards you, and they move through your body system. It's not me through my ear holes, like listening to the music. It's just like whoosh, getting washed, and that's what folks are showing up for. And so it's a sort of neurosomatic acoustic discombobulation. And that apparently is something that a lot of folks are into, especially if they're pharmacologically primed. So, and Amy was just saying, I absolutely love EDM. There's an absolute link between the beats, breaks, drops, and range of sounds in the human brain. It's capable of changing your thought processes and your mood. Yeah, absolutely. And Oliver Sacks at NYU, he was now dead, but was an awesome dude, and wrote all kinds of beautiful books. One said, he said basically that music and our ability to create trance states, entrainment, collective movement is one of the, no surprise, one of the more powerful forces on the planet. And in fact, Stephen Johnson, if you guys have ever read his book, How We Got to Now, incredible writer, super fun, really accessible. But he tells the great story of the caves of Arc de Souris in France. And they couldn't understand for a long ass time, why was all the amazing art, the cave art, way the hell down deep in the cave? They're like, this is away from sunlight, there's probably freaky, spooky critters down there, like what were they doing? And they actually did some acoustic resonance testing, and they realized, they basically put their paintings in the subwoofers of the cave. So they chose where to locate the majority of their most ambitious art in the place where we'd be like, okay, let's go bumping along under the stalactites and this kind of stuff. Let's go hang out in the place where if we chant and drum, we get reverb, we get echoes, we get all this stuff. And that behavior has carried all the way through human history. From the giant Gothic arches of Notre Dame and Chartres, where you have literally like these huge pipe organs with just like, with all the stone and rock influencing it, all the way to today. And Apple, the computer company, and Sonos, the speaker manufacturer, just did a recent study on, hey, what's the role of music in people's houses? And they took Nest Cams, those little observer things. They did Sonos, they did iPhone, iWatches to track everybody's biometrics. And they found that listening to music in the house actually prompted, to your point, and you guys are now asking so many questions, I'm not able to respond to them all. So I'd love to be able, let's see if I can scroll. Yes, I can. Okay, so let me try this. Do-do. And Alan Lowe, yeah, thanks, man, for sharing. Totally appreciate that. Amy was just, so let me go back to here. Do. You guys are some solid groupies. Mike Roberts, what do you see as the end game for exploration flow? Okay, I'm going to stop that one there, and I'm going to come back to this in a sec. So what the Sonos study showed was that basically, the likely, like physical proximity between people in a house became like 37% closer. And the likelihood of cooking went up like 18%. And the likelihood of making love was like 33%. And the likelihood of inviting people over was over 80% higher. So the idea that music shapes us, that we've been attempting to intensify it, amplify it for as long as we've had human culture. I mean, since we were in caves, we've been choosing to pump up the jams, right? And now we're seeing this evolution and progression all the way to electronic music. I just think, it's a fascinating story. And for people, particularly of a generation that never became accustomed to electronic music, it's an explanation, it's an offering. Because if they're like, what are all those weird sounds? And this doesn't even sound like music. And what's the big deal? And how do you even enjoy listening to this? Well, the answer can be, it's not what it sounds like on our iPod. It's what it sounds like in front of one of those stacks. And it's what it sounds like connected to 100,000 other people next to some of those stacks. It is a mass entrainment device. And so just to loop back to that Android Jones story, he was basically doing sort of digital real-time stained glass in the Church of Trance at Boomfest, which is the Portuguese festival every other year that's closest analog is Burning Man in the United States, but it's its own beautiful beast. And Function One comes, and Tony Andrews is the guy's name, who's the founder of Function One. They come and they debut their baddest-ass new stuff at Boomfest, and they create the Dance Temple. And it's literally, they create it as a sacred chamber to transmute human consciousness. And Andrew, who's, he's a West Coast bass boy, has a little farm near Boulder in Colorado. He was like, I never understood what psytrance or, kind of these deep, super hypnotic, not very varied kind of Euro EDM stuff was. He's like, I never understood it, because like Burning Man is, at least several years ago was much like funkier, more tribal, a lot more bass, a lot more breakbeat kind of stuff. And he went and he's like, oh, now I get it. Because what happens, especially in that high-fidelity soundscape, is it goes and it goes and it goes and it goes. Not unlike voodoo dancing or West African stuff that's just rhythmic, hypnotic, but ever so slightly arrhythmic. And what it does is it knocks your neurological state out of beta into some alpha threshold theta. And then he was like, and then you pop through. And when you pop through, you look around and you realize, oh, I'm here, and actually I can totally tell who else is also here with me. And so it becomes this sonic kinetic stargate that people are able to trip themselves out of time and come out the other side. And like, that's the nectar. And, it may not be that all the practitioners have specifically that kind of language or that neurobiological mechanism to say this is what's going on and why, but there's a shit pile of people that are showing up at that gate going, I'd like to go through again, please. So that's kind of, I would say, the high level between what's going on. And again, I think it's in theaters this weekend, right? Is a 50 Shades doc or something funny like that. So if you're ever wondering why there's this curious discrepancy between both, Pulp Fiction and film like that and its popularity, and otherwise seemingly totally monotonous music and its popularity, the answer could be ecstasis. It's the states that they precipitate, not the innate quality of the art they are. And once you understand the neurobiology that they prime, you're like, oh, that is what's getting people's attention. That is what people are willing to pay for and show up for. So I hope that helps. I hope if nothing else you have some super nerdy cocktail conversations for this weekend. And I'd love to just kind of answer some questions now. So Mike just asked, what do you see as the end game of the human exploration of flow? That's a banging question. My sense would be is that it offers a possibility, right? All bets are off and we'll see. But that it offers the possibility for the next up-leveling in human consciousness. So in the same way that 18th century French Enlightenment introduced rational individualism, that access to these flow states, in particular what we've just been describing, in relationship with others, whether it's your loving partner or whether it's 100,000 friends, is that rational individualism can be making the next level up to post-rational collectivism. And what that means is what happens when we all wake up and hook up together. And I think, my guess is if you're hanging out on this wrap, you've probably experienced that in some shape or form in your life. And, at least speaking from my own experience, there's nothing sweeter. Waking up yourself, having some kick-ass breakthrough experience is super fun, but what's the first thing you want to do? Like, you want to go share it. You're like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what just happened to me, right? So the idea of us waking up, and just like computers, when we connect in serial, right, we become a supercomputer. And again, we write about this in our new book, Stealing Fire, which if you're stoked about, feel free to check out. But the opening story is SEAL Team 6, right? And how they hack these same states, different mechanisms, different training routines, but the same states, what they call flip the switch, where they suddenly move as a seamless unit, where they swap leads, where everybody knows what's going on, where the right hand and the left hand know exactly what's happening with no verbal communication. And that's the superpower. And what we're also seeing right now, which we did not anticipate when we were writing this book. This has been 2 years in the coming. So we talk about this power of the collective, right? And what's next. So Mike, your question, what's next? And we said, hey, but this can be used for ill, right? We can go from rational individualism all the way up to post-rational collectivism, right? Love, light, unity, peace, love, unity, respect, right? That whole jam. Or it can be pulled back down the ladder to pre-rational or irrational collectivism, the rule of the mob, right? And we're seeing a lot of that these days. This election cycle, politics around the world these days, we're getting a lot of folks saying, we are not making that next leap. We are going to regress this thing, and we're going to pull it down to power and strongmen and ideologues, and we're going to whip people into frenzies, right, where they start feeling tightly connected, but not to humanity, not to the earth, not to a shared experience, but to I, me, mine, ours. And it's a little known fact, which I will repeat as often as needed, right, that oxytocin, which most people in sort of, neuroscience blogs like, oh, that's the cuddle hormone, or that's the trust hormone. Well, oxytocin is also the ethnic tribalism hormone. So when you create these states, when you create rhythmic movement, when you create sound, chanting, dance, Heil Hitlers, right, rah, 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 lock her up, right, you do any of those repetitive movements, statements, expressions, you combine light, sound, large crowds, mirror neurons, you can entrain people. And it can be entraining people to the better angels of their nature, right, or to the darker demons of the collective human id. So I would say that, Mike, and this is an extended response, but clearly you struck a chord. This is up for me, and we'll be writing another essay this weekend on exactly this, which will be entitled, like based on Ben Franklin's riff, we must all hang together, or we shall all hang separately. So I would say it hangs in the balance right now. And we had no idea that in the writing of this book it was going to happen this quickly and be for this sort of high stakes so soon. I thought we had 5 to 10 years and we could just kind of talk about it and be on talk shows and be like, well, Bob, that's an interesting question. Let me respond. It kind of feels like this is the user manual. Now get it, read it, do it, and let's show up for each other. So I think it's the pre-rational rule of the mob. And by the way, Hitler's Nuremberg rallies were deliberate. The irony of all ironies is that the Germans were, beat to shit in World War I. They, Weimar Republic and all that kind of stuff in the 1920s. And he deliberately restored pageantry. So he borrowed stuff from the church. And then he also borrowed stuff from American cheerleading. The Sieg Heil was an American college football cheerleading move. Right? And so we see those kinds of things, and we see those things present today. And for many progressives, that's the thing they can't wrap their head around. Because what is, like some broad, global-centric progressive point of view is typically like, hey, we're all one, and life is complicated, and everybody's entitled to their own point of view, and we're all in this together-ish, right? And you could say that you could make a case that that is its Achilles heel. It's too clever for its own boots. Because compared to what it's going up against, which is I, me, mine, ours. We got an in-group, we got an other, we scapegoat them, we redefine and affirm our own identity. That's powerful. It's simple, but it's powerful. And unless or until progressives can come up with comparably clear and effective stands and in a way to harness the power of communitas, going to get crushed by the folks that can do it better. So thanks, Mike, for asking that question. I want to keep scrolling down and see if there's any more. Dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex is our enemy and must be stopped with rhythmic rituals. And Answer Time would love to hear any input or importance. Now, I don't get to read the rest of your comment there. It kind of got dotted. But let's just say, hey, let's not hate on the prefrontal cortex. Right? The prefrontal cortex is what allows me to have this conversation with you. Right? It's what allowed us to have super crazy fun smartphones to transmit this shit across Wi-Fi. Right? It's what allowed us to put wordy sounds into mouthy sounds into pages in a book. Right? It gave us civil rights. It gave us democracy. Right? It gave us the scientific revolution. So let's give it up for the prefrontal cortex, right time, right place, right use. The key is only when it is the sole and exclusive tool through which we experience being alive. That's when it's a son of a bitch. Right? And that's when it becomes a burden. That's when it becomes a prison. And so the idea here is that understanding techniques of ecstasy, understanding our ability, whether it's through sexuality, through dance and psychedelics, through music, through immersive VR, through endurance sports and athletes, through creative endeavors and dance and movement, doesn't matter. Right? But once we understand them and we understand them objectively, right, we demystify them. We cut out the middlemen, the gatekeepers, and we have access to them ourselves to explore and experiment and grow. Then we have the keys to our cage, right? We have the ability to unlock that prison house of our minds, step out of the soul province of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, right, our executive function, our inner critic, and explore more interesting and expansive ways of seeing and being. And the interesting thing, the beautiful thing, the potentially powerful and momentous thing is that the key to our cage is the key to the kingdom, right? Not only does it set us free from the constraints of restrictive ego, but it also gives us access to the information and the inspiration, and if we do our homework, the transformation, right, that non-ordinary states routinely bring. So that's the deal. It's all of it. Let's embrace all of it, and that's the key. Let's not wage war on straw men. Yeah. So Eric, let's just see there. You're just saying there's lots of terrible EDM. There's also lots of great stuff. Festival show I've never been on. Just dancing. Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm taking the piss out of mainstream bro step club straight beat EDM. I just have a horrendous problem with it because I just find myself so close to like oods, 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 oods. You know, they go to a fake break. The drop doesn't go any place near interesting, and I just find it musically mediocre as all get out and not interesting. And the only people that seem to routinely be dancing are those ones rolling their faces off, right? Who just cannot help themselves. So that's playful. I agree. There's some amazing music, and in fact, it wasn't until going to Burning Man for the first time and hearing a Function 1 sound system and hearing some truly, in fact, it was Mimosa. If anybody follows Mimosa, he's been playing some interesting stuff lately. But I was just like, oh, I get it. I mean, I'd grown up with Grateful Dead, early Fish, bluegrass bands and Telluride. I was like rootsy, old time live music experience. So couldn't have been further from like prone to being into that, and then got to experience that. And I'm like, aha, I get it. And so yes, total hat tip to all the great. In fact, Plantrae, Plantrae, is a viola player and producer out of Portland. Feel free to check his stuff out. Love it. Emancipator is another, love it. Beats Antique, Desert Dwellers. I mean, I'll tip on West Coast bass preferences personally, but let's think of who else. Anybody else? Oh, and Kalia Scintilla. If anybody has not come across and is into EDM, Kalya Scintilla, Scintilla. And in my experience, he is the cleanest sounding, most transformational producer I've come across. So by all means, go check that stuff out. Christian was just saying, interesting analysis, though I'm feeling like the assumption that EDM sucks is rather simplistic. There's a lot, yes. So we've already covered that, but yes, absolutely. I am playing the deliberate provocateur on a Friday afternoon just to be mildly entertaining, but hell yeah, there's some amazing stuff. Mindy was just saying, love sound therapy. You can use it to harmonize ancient indigenous peoples. Yeah, I mean, and that's why, why are didgeridoos as powerful as they are? Absolutely, vibration and sound can do an amazing amount of stuff, and we've even come across in like Montessori catalogs and even like alter-abled habilitations catalogs for kids with learning differences. These giant-ass marimbas, like literally so big you can lie on them and then play them so that the vibrations go through the children. So a kid with autistic spectrum stuff, sensory integration issues, and those kind of things can be deeply and profoundly healed and fixed by the power of sound. And to say nothing but the rest of us, it just feels good. Right? So Uni just shared some. Thank you so much. Walking Clouds. So we're talking about a shared dream of sorts, transcending the subjective experience, moving into a deeper connection within the field of existence. However, we're still stuck. And again, ... So I didn't get to read the rest, but just to kind of riff on that bit. Yes, the question is how do we wake up and grow up and show up? And if we can wake up and remember what we forgot, individually, and we can help each other. And I don't know if this is true for you guys. I have routinely experienced this. When I'm in community, when I'm in a conversation with other people that love each other, that we have access to more. And there will be conversations that are literally powered down, offline, not accessible until we're back in that spot together. And once we're there, it's like, oh, yes. And then it becomes, there becomes that moment where it's like, I am actually giving voice to or expressing what is true for all of us in this moment. And that's that Zulu phrase Ubuntu, like I am because we are. It's Martin Buber, the theologian, says that, between in the I-thou relationship, God is the hyphen. Right? It's the Nazarene, where two or more are gathered. Right? There I shall be. And so ideally, that's the jam, right? That's the game. Can we make art? Can we make love? Can we make music together and wake each other up? And that's initially a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then, and not to be a buzz shave, but my sense is it comes with a responsibility. It comes with an obligation. So it's that, if anybody's been listening to our other lives, yeah, for sure, I will repeat a couple of key memes because they're key. But it's that old Pink Floyd thing, would you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in a cage? And so what's that walk-on part in the war, right? Where are we off to go? What do we have to do? Because, if we think about this as like the hero's journey, and most folks are familiar. And by the way, thanks for that flood of like thumbs up and hearts. That's really nice to experience. The quest, right? The hero's quest is to find the Grail Castle, right? And that Grail Castle is only accessible by the purest of heart. And Philip, and in fact, in the stories of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, like the old Arthurian legends, right? Gawain is the young innocent, and he finds his way to the Grail Castle, and he makes it through. He makes it through the stuff that has eluded all the other knights because he's absolutely pure. And then he gets kicked out. He meets the Fisher King, and he gets kicked out, and he spends like decades trying to find it again. Not unlike Siddhartha, if you've read Hermann Hesse's story, right? Siddhartha's about to switch on at age 20. And then he goes into the town and he deals and he gambles and he has a woman and a child and he forgets, he almost goes to sleep before coming back to it. So a very similar premise, right? So the idea, and then Philip K. Dick talked about, the Grail Castle is also known as the Chapel Perilous. And the Chapel Perilous is, particularly in psychedelic realms and spaces, is like that hall of mirrors where you've moved beyond conventional ego-bound identity, and it's literally that. It's a hall of mirrors. And you can lose your mind and your mortal soul if you're not pure of heart. And that's the only thing that gets you through. And that's true with all the legends, most movies, right? I mean, it's like the wit of Odysseus or the wit of Neo or Luke or any of our, archetypal heroes. It's never their firepower. It's never the superior technology or weaponry they have. It's always down to the last moment. They dig deep into the core of their being and find that thing that's been in them all along, right? And the key here, guys, because we're talking about ecstasis, right? We're talking about kinky sex and fucking EDM, right? And hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people around the world right now exploring and experiencing this stuff like never before, right? And the idea is that this Grail Castle, right, the culminating destination for this hero's journey, where the loving cup is to be found, right, shares a wall with the Hotel California. And if we're getting so good right now at throwing the party at the end of time, right, let's just turn on our love lights, let's neck snapping, ecstatic release, and communion, that's awesome, yay. But we cannot forget what we came for. We cannot forget why we threw that party. Because what could begin as a quest for transcendence and service can end up, you can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. And I'm sure that we all have friends or acquaintances that are playing in this space, right? And who start out well-intentioned and maybe have profound breakthroughs and insights and deep healing, but they go back to the wishing well a little too quickly. They cut a few corners. They double down on the chemical assists. Right? They start playing in polyamorous spaces. They start cutting corners on ethics. They start, and not to say categorically polyamory is wrong, just to say they start cutting corners in their relationship to the intersection of spirituality and sexuality. They start cutting corners in their relationship to embodied transcendence. Right? They're far more likely to stay up all night and pop some pills than they are to spend 4 hours in a yoga session and eating cleanly. Right? So this idea, the Grail Castle and the Hotel California share an inside wall. And if we're throwing this part at the end of time, it's probably just in time. Right? It lets us step outside ourselves and remember what we came for. And, right, it's for mortal stakes. So with that, guys, that's so awesome to be back. I mean, there's so many Fridays. I'm like, okay, this is the week. I'm jumping back on the horse. Thank you for being here and for so many amazing comments. That's it for now. I'm going to go back to writing. If you guys want to jump in and read more, share more, connect with each other more, stealingfirebook.com is where you can check it out. It comes out in 2 weeks, so pre-orders, sharing it with friends, getting this message out is what we're here to do. It's our life's work, and hopefully it resonates for you guys too. And there's also going to be a group that we're calling the Pyros, which is our kind of ground team of 500 folks who are going to be out around the world. Just getting it out and sharing it with the people that need it. So if you're already a Promethean, if you've already been stealing fire, and this is just straight down the fairway of your lived experience, this one's for you. This is your user manual. If you're a closeted ecstatic, and you've had these yearnings, you experience them and express them sometimes, but you keep it under wraps, or you keep parts of your life shielded or walled off from yourself or from others that are close to you because they wouldn't understand or they'd judge. Or you have other people in your life that are clearly seeking this somehow, but you're concerned for them, and you're not sure if they're doing it in the safest or most informed or sustainable way. This is who we've written the book for. So it's a total labor of love. Hopefully it's got some ripping ass stories in there to keep you engaged. And guys, have a wonderful weekend and lots of love. Be well, everybody.